The text arrives before the guest does. Park on the left, not the right. Knock once, wait 5 seconds, then knock again. Shoes in the basket. Sparkling water only from the glass bottle with the cork top. Suddenly you are not visiting a friend. You are approaching a small private border crossing run by someone who owns 3 matching candles and a deep belief that normal life is one bad guest away from collapse. Why do house rules like this keep multiplying? Why does every tiny preference become policy the second other people step inside? And when did hospitality start sounding like a museum audio guide with trust issues? Stay with this file. Because the rules get stranger pettier and much more revealing once the front door closes behind you. 1. At a dinner party in Phoenix, guests were told to remove their shoes, then also their socks. Because the host said bare feet picked up less outside dirt than fabric that remembers parking lots. Everyone spent the first 10 minutes pretending tile was warmer than it was. By dessert, 4 adults were walking on tiptoe around a kitchen island like they had entered a very polite hostage situation. 2. In a suburban split-level outside Columbus, the bathroom had 2 towel stacks. One stack was for hands. The other was decorative and apparently too beautiful to survive moisture. A guest used the wrong one, then found it draped back into a perfect rectangle before she returned from the toilet. Nothing says welcome home quite like learning the linens have a higher social rank than you do. 3. A host in Dallas asked everyone to greet the dog before greeting her. Because the dog needs emotional transparency from new energy. Guests lined up by the entry bench and addressed a trembling golden doodle like junior diplomats reporting for duty. The dog sneezed on one man's khakis and was immediately forgiven. The host, meanwhile, watched silently to see who passed the loyalty test first. 4. At an apartment in Brooklyn, every guest received a coaster with their name on it, but not because the host was organized. It was because she had memorized which friends left condensation rings and which ones respected wood grain. The glasses were less a beverage system than a surveillance grid. By the end of the night, people were holding drinks in midair like nervous jurors waiting for instructions. 5. One couple in Denver banned sitting on the living room couch entirely because it was their photo couch. It was real furniture with real cushions in a real home. But it existed mainly for holiday cards and seasonal throw pillows. Guests were redirected to a wooden bench near the window that looked decorative and turned out to feel like a bus stop in 1894. 6. In Tampa, a host would only let visitors drink water from a blue pitcher marked for human sipping. The sink filter was good, the fridge filter was suspicious, and bottled water was apparently spiritually lazy. He delivered this speech with the seriousness of a man describing a witness protection program. Nobody argued. People just accepted that hydration now had its own chain of command. 7. A woman in Seattle insisted the bathroom fan stay on during every visit because she believed mirror fog trapped face oil in the room. That is not how condensation works, but confidence can overpower physics in small enclosed spaces. Guests emerged from the bathroom having heard the fan roar like a departing aircraft, looking as if they had not washed their hands so much as survived an extraction. 8. In Orlando, ice was banned at family gatherings because the host counted cubes and claimed people always get greedy with the freezer. The tray was filled like a luxury resource during wartime, and each drink became an ethics test. One uncle dropped a 4th cube into sweet tea and got the same look usually reserved for people who steal catalytic converters. 9. At one movie night in Street, Lewis talking during the show was forbidden, but not just spoilers. No whispering, no snack commentary, no wait, who is that guy? The host paused the film if anyone spoke, then stared until the room returned to order. The result was not cinema. It was a detention hall with popcorn. Even the dog crunched kibble like it had legal exposure. 10. In a condo near Miami, guests had to keep their bags on a metal chair by the door because the owner believed purses carried sidewalk bacteria the way sparks carry fire. Surface contamination is real, but she treated every tote like it had done time. People clutched lip gloss and keys all evening because setting a handbag on the counter carried the moral weight of arson. 11. A host in Minneapolis set the thermostat at 68 and taped a handwritten sign above it that read, "This is not a democracy." The rule itself was normal. The framing was not. The sign converted mild climate preference into constitutional law. When one guest put on a second hoodie, the host smiled and said, "See, personal responsibility still works." That tiny plastic dial now had authoritarian energy. 12. At a family cookout in Atlanta, guests were forbidden from helping in the kitchen because the host said assistance breaks the workflow. This sounded efficient until she also complained nobody ever helped her. People stood in the doorway holding paper plates while she marched past with 3 casserole dishes and rising resentment. The room filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and passive-aggressive labor management. 13. One Los Angeles apartment had a house rule against saying "I'm obsessed about anything" because the host found the phrase emotionally unserious. Shoes fine. Wine fine. But someone complimented a lamp and said the banned phrase and the room went quiet. Language policing at a party always lands with a thud. Suddenly everybody was editing casual speech like their friendship required legal review. 14. In Nashville, a guest bathroom displayed a framed note asking visitors to flush only with the lid closed, then wait 10 seconds before opening it. The host had read about aerosol spread and inflated one sensible hygiene point into a ceremonial delay sequence. Nobody wanted to look ignorant, so people emerged from the bathroom appearing strangely contemplative, like they had just completed a meditation on plumbing. 15. At a ranch house in Arizona, opening the blinds was prohibited because the host did not want neighbors knowing she had company. Guests sat in afternoon darkness while sunlight burned bright just inches away. Privacy can be practical. This was more theatrical than practical. The room looked like a witness interview on a crime show, except the alleged offense was attending brunch with too much natural enthusiasm. 16. In a meticulously renovated row house in Philadelphia, taking photos indoors was banned unless the host approved the angle first. She said the house looked different in wide lens, which is true in the same way taxes are technically a form of paperwork. Guests learned quickly that hospitality now included image management. Even the cheese board had to pass through a soft launch publicity department. 17. One suburban mom in New Jersey poured chips into exact bowls, then warned guests not to refill them because open bags lose dignity fast. Snack control tells you everything you need to know about a household's spiritual climate. Nobody wanted to be the person reaching into the pantry. People crunched slowly, counting fragments, performing the kind of restraint usually associated with wildlife documentaries during drought season. 18. In Portland, cups were color-coded by guest category. Family got ceramic. Close friends got glass. Co-workers got acrylic. Repairmen got bottled water outside. The system was explained cheerfully, which somehow made it harsher. Material hierarchy turns a simple drink into a census. One man realized halfway through the evening that his tumbler was unbreakable because the host did not trust his place in her social ecosystem. 19. A host in Houston asked dinner guests to remove watches and bracelets before leaning on the kitchen island because the quartz had micro-scratch trauma. Stone does scratch over time, but the phrase alone transformed countertops into nervous royalty. People ate standing like surgeons waiting for a sterile field. Nobody relaxed. The kitchen felt less like the heart of the home than the clean room of a chip factory. 20. In Chicago, phone charging was banned in the kitchen because those outlets were for machines with a purpose. The host said this while air-frying frozen taquitos and running a scented wax warmer shaped like a cottage. Rules get weird when appliances become moral categories. Guests searched for outlets the way stranded travelers search for water, only to discover that electricity now came with a value statement. 21. A woman in Sacramento required cloth napkins to be refolded before being placed beside the plate, even mid-meal because she could not stand collapsed table lines. Once aesthetics outrank appetite, dinner becomes stagecraft. Guests wiped sauce from their mouths and then performed tiny textile origami under pressure. It was impossible to discuss normal things while everyone quietly feared failing a fabric-based final exam. 22. At a house in Raleigh, the front door was for arrivals only. Once inside, guests had to use the side door for any re-entry because the host liked the symmetry of the foyer remaining undisturbed. This meant smokers' kids, and one forgetful cousin kept circling the exterior like confused delivery drivers. The house was not haunted. It just had zoning regulations written by one very committed person. 23. In San Diego, perfume and scented lotion were forbidden around the baby, which was reasonable, except the baby was 17 months old and asleep in a closed room upstairs while 6 adults whispered downstairs in unscented panic. Sensitivity rules often begin in care and end in atmosphere control. By the second hour, the living room smelled like nothing and felt like an expensive waiting room. 24. One condo host in Boston insisted only one person use the hallway at a time because the antique mirror on the wall was structurally emotional. Nobody knew what that meant, but the mirror stayed, and the hallway became a one-lane bridge. Guests yielded passage with solemn nods. It was the first apartment some people had entered where walking to the bathroom required traffic diplomacy. 25. At a game night in Milwaukee, the host required everyone to compliment the houseplant shelf before snacks were served. She said the plants were doing more for this room than most people notice. The compliment ritual spread like compulsory tribute. Soon adults were praising pothos leaf density to earn hummus access. Nothing clarifies power faster than realizing the ficus gets acknowledged before the guests do. That was the gentle part of the file, where the rules still looked like quirks with decent lighting. The next layer is where preference hardens into procedure, and people start treating company like a manageable biohazard. 26. In a duplex outside Kansas City, guests had to wash their hands before touching the TV remote because the host called it the household steering wheel. High-touch surfaces do collect grime, but the remote was stored in a velvet sleeve, which moved the whole thing beyond hygiene and into monarchy. People sat on the couch waiting for sanitized permission to change a channel like peasants approaching state property. 27. A friend in Austin banned sitting on the bed in outside clothes, then extended the rule to airport clothes, restaurant clothes, and gas station energy. By evening, categories had multiplied faster than laundry. Guests perched on desk chairs while overnight bags sat untouched, as if denim itself carried a criminal record. The host's bedroom had become a demilitarized zone between public life and cotton sheets. 28. At a beach rental in South Carolina, shoes were banned inside except on the balcony, where everyone had to wear shoes because the host worried about salty foot oil on the deckboards. Contradictory rule systems always produced the same outcome. People hopping in thresholds, forgetting which surface belongs to which logic. The whole weekend looked like a low-budget dance rehearsal choreographed by anxiety. 29. In suburban Detroit, guests could not open the refrigerator without asking first because the host said cold air loss adds up over years. That is technically true the way one raindrop contributes to a floodplain. The actual point was ownership. Everyone knows the deepest layer of house rules is often not about energy. It is about who gets to move freely near the butter drawer. 30. A woman in San Francisco forbade anyone from placing keys on the entry table because metal aggressed the wood tone. She kept a ceramic tray directly beside the table, which meant the key ban was not about practicality. It was about ritual precision. Guests entered, froze, shifted keys from hand to hand, and felt the first tiny thrill of learning they had stepped into somebody else's private religion. 31. In a large house outside Charlotte, every overnight guest got assigned a shower time slot, complete with a marker board on the fridge. The stated reason was hot water fairness. The deeper effect was military scheduling with hand towels. No one wants to feel competitive in a robe. Yet, there it was, adults glancing at magnets and trying to negotiate conditioner around a 7:30 plumbing window. 32. At a holiday gathering in Pittsburgh, children were required to ask permission before opening interior doors because the host said closed doors stay closed for a reason. This began as child-proofing and evolved into domestic espionage theater. Kids moved through the house like junior federal agents awaiting clearance. When one cousin opened a linen closet by mistake, you would have thought he had breached an archived wing. 33. In a townhouse near Salt Lake City, guests were told not to compliment the renovation too enthusiastically because the host did not want her husband getting smug in front of people. This is where house rules leave object management and enter relationship weather control. Everyone began praising the floors in a flat, careful tone, like addressing a horse known to spook at sudden admiration. 34. A couple in Northern Virginia had a ban on unannounced seconds at dinner. If you wanted more, you had to wait until the host offered. Portion control can disguise itself as manners very easily. The practical result was a table full of adults calculating potato appetite against social timing. Nothing undermines abundance faster than making lasagna feel like a grant application process. 35. In a smart home near San Jose, guests were not allowed to touch light switches because all lighting scenes were optimized by room intent. Nobody knew what room intent meant, but the bulbs dimmed. glowed and color shifted on schedule while humans obeyed. Smart systems often promise convenience and end by centralizing authority in the person who knows the app password. Everyone else just blinks in curated amber. 36. At one apartment in Manhattan, visitors had to take off mascara before using the guest pillow because the host tracked smudges with the focus of a crime lab intern. Makeup does transfer, but the inspection ritual was the real event. Guests slept stiffly, trying to keep their faces above the fabric like synchronized swimmers who had developed a sudden respect for white cotton and judgment. 37. A host in New Orleans prohibited people from putting empty bottles in the recycling during the party because the clink sound collapses the mood. This is the kind of rule that sounds artistic until you're holding a sticky beer bottle with nowhere honorable to place it. Soon, every surface gained one half-finished container. The vibe survived. The kitchen looked like a festival had surrendered. 38. In Indianapolis, a host asked guests not to lean back in dining chairs because the chairs were emotionally antique, which turned dinner into a core strength exercise. Furniture weight limits are real. Emotional antiques are branding. Half the table sat upright like candidates in a televised debate. Nothing helps a meal breathe quite like reminding adults that posture failure may count as historical disrespect. 39. At a duplex in Albuquerque, guests had to choose one bathroom and stick to it for the evening so the host could track soap depletion logically. Systems begin wherever uncertainty becomes intolerable. Nobody enjoys being assigned a restroom lane. By the second hour, people were whispering location updates like air traffic controllers. The plumbing still worked. Human dignity was the resource under strain. 40. A woman in Cleveland banned phone calls inside the house because hearing one side of a conversation made her feel held hostage by context. There is real irritation there, but banning calls entirely turns a preference into municipal policy. Guests drifted onto the porch in all weather to say basic things like, "I'm here," or "grab milk on the way." Communication had been rezoned outdoors. 41. In a newly built home near Boise, guests were instructed not to open kitchen drawers because the host liked the factory tension of the soft-close hardware. New cabinetry can produce a small, ridiculous pride. Soon, however, pride becomes the museum policy. Forks had to be requested verbally like controlled substances. Watching a grown man ask permission for a teaspoon does sharpen the meaning of ownership. 42. At a dinner in Providence, everyone had assigned seating not by friendship, but by spilled probability. Children and red wine enthusiasts were clustered away from the rug. Risk management at a table is not inherently insane. Saying it out loud is what changes the air. One guest spent the meal becoming painfully aware that he had been ranked by his perceived ability to knock over Merlot. 43. In suburban Phoenix, the host banned anyone from using the phrase, "make yourself at home." She said it was false advertising and she preferred honesty. Brutal clarity has a certain charm until it becomes literal doctrine. Guests laughed, then realized she meant it. The whole evening shifted. Nobody touched cabinets, nobody adjusted pillows, and the room settled into the exact stiffness the sentence had predicted. 44. At an anniversary dinner in Cincinnati, the host forbade discussing other people's houses under her roof because comparison energy lingers. This is what happens when insecurity acquires furniture. Guests had to describe renovations elsewhere using coded language, like they were smuggling countertop gossip across a border. One woman started saying that place up north with the Navy cabinets as though cabinets were witness protection identities. 45. In a bungalow in Santa Fe, guests were told not to stack plates after eating because the host believed scraped ceramics sounded resentful. Sound sensitivity can be real. Translating it into emotional dish theory is another matter entirely. Adults sat before their empty plates waiting for collection like passengers on a train platform. Silence held. Then someone's fork tapped porcelain and the host visibly flinched. 46. A host in suburban Maryland had separate guest slippers by season and asked visitors not to choose for themselves because foot temperature affects decision quality. That is a magnificent sentence to hear while standing at a mudroom bench in borrowed socks. Soon, everyone was being professionally fitted for indoor movement. Hospitality had drifted into a boutique wellness dictatorship, one fleece sole at a time. 47. In Oklahoma City, guests could not use the word "finally" when complimenting the finished remodel because the host heard it as criticism of the timeline. Rule systems often reveal the bruise they are protecting. People began speaking in awkward praise loops. It turned out beautifully. It looks complete. What a result. The remodeled kitchen gleamed. Every sentence around it arrived wearing a helmet. 48. At a condo in Las Vegas, everyone had to place used drink cans in numbered spots on the counter so the host could later calculate consumption honesty. Counting empties is one thing. Numbering them during the party introduces parole office energy. Guests glanced at each other and slowed down. A simple hard seltzer now felt like something that might appear in a quarterly performance review. 49. In Vermont, a host banned guests from feeding table scraps to the dog, then also banned eye contact with the dog during dinner because he weaponizes pity. Behavioral conditioning exists. Dogs do learn patterns fast. Still, it is difficult to feel relaxed while being told a beagle is running a manipulative campaign. The dog sat under the table like a union organizer with wet eyes. 50. At a house near Orlando, every person entering had to announce whether they had recently used strong cleaner, perfumed gasoline, or fast food, because the host believed smells fight in the air after dark. Odor layering is real, but not in the apocalyptic register he described. Guests stood in the foyer, giving scent disclosures like nervous customs forms, while a candle burned nearby, pretending to restore order. Now the rules stop feeling handmade and start looking connected. Same tension, different wallpaper. The house is no longer shelter. It is a control panel, and every guest is a finger hovering too close to the wrong switch. We have already seen the remote treated like state property. Decorative towels outranking actual bodies, and adults issuing scent declarations at the door. The second half gets wider. More devices, more status, more ways. Ordinary hospitality turns into a small private bureaucracy with snacks. 51. In a renovated farmhouse in Iowa, guests were forbidden from using overhead lights at night because the host said warm lamps preserved evening integrity. Lighting preference is ordinary. Calling it integrity turns it into doctrine. People peered into chip bowls by side table glow while trying not to seem confused. The room looked cozy in photographs and faintly conspiratorial in person, like everyone was planning a tasteful coup. 52. A host in suburban Tampa required visitors to text before ringing the doorbell, even when already standing outside because the camera alerted the dog and the dog alerted her nervous system. Smart doorbell culture has quietly turned arrival into staging. Guests stood on the porch sending here like gig workers waiting for pickup. It was not enough to arrive. You had to arrive in the approved software format. 53. In Connecticut, a host banned people from putting grocery bags on the kitchen floor because the floor was for feet, not food adjacency. Cross-contamination matters in actual prep spaces, but this was a sealed bag of lemons and cereal. Household rules often expand by association, not logic. Soon bags hovered on chairs, counters, and laps. The groceries entered like visiting nobility with floor-related exemptions. 54. At one party in Louisville, guests were asked not to laugh too sharply because the baby monitor carried sound upstairs. Everyone tried soft laughter for about 8 minutes, which sounded like a room full of people politely malfunctioning. Then someone actually laughed at a story and the host froze. The conversation did not die. It merely learned that Joy now had an approved volume ceiling. 55. A couple in Silicon Valley had a no crosstalk rule at dinner. Only one person could speak at a time, and interruptions had to be acknowledged and released. In theory, this sounded mindful. In practice, it gave taco night the tempo of a deposition. Conversation works because overlap creates heat and rhythm. Remove that, and even funny stories start sounding like testimony reviewed by counsel. 56. In a home near Baton Rouge, guests were instructed to rinse plates before placing them in the dishwasher. But not too much because the host liked evidence of gratitude without chunks. Dishwashers actually need some residue for many detergents to work correctly, which is more science than anyone asked for at pie time. Still grown adults stood at the sink trying to calibrate the ideal amount of respectful sauce. 57. At a birthday dinner in suburban Seattle, no one was allowed to bring store-bought dessert because the host believed bakery boxes flattened the emotional tone. Rules like this treat packaging as a threat to sincerity. One guest arrived with a perfectly good pie and had to plate it in the garage before entering. The crust survived. The gesture did not. Hospitality had become customs inspection for frosting. 58. In Jersey City, a host had a basket labeled Outdoor Thoughts, and guests were encouraged to put phones in it so they could be fully present. Noble concept. Then she checked the basket herself every 20 minutes to see whether anyone had slipped. Nothing drains a room faster than mindfulness with enforcement. Presence cannot bloom under supervision. It just sits there blinking beneath a crocheted sign. 59. A host in suburban Atlanta required everyone to use the guest bathroom tissue in sets of 3 because she said the fancy roll shreds unpredictably if you rush. Bathroom math is where domestic order reveals its final form. Nobody wants to think in multiples while standing in a small locked room. Yet there it was. People doing silent paper calculations under recessed lighting like they were diffusing something. 60. In Oakland, guests were banned from rearranging throw pillows, but also expected to move them before sitting because the pillows tell the room who it is. A decorative object that cannot remain decorative without human negotiation is already running for office. Guests lifted angled and replaced lumbar cushions with visible uncertainty. The sofa eventually got used, but only after a ceremonial debate between comfort and branding. 61. A host in suburban Nashville asked visitors not to mention the weather indoors because she believed it dragged outside chaos into the conversation. This sounds mystical until you realize every gathering needs easy, neutral topics to keep strangers alive. Remove the weather, and people start jumping straight into layoffs, divorce, and colonoscopies. Sometimes small talk is not lazy. It is structural support for civilization. 62. In a condo in Minneapolis, everyone had to use a landing plate before setting hot food on the dining table, even for 1 second because the host feared thermal shock in the wood finish. Sudden heat can mark surfaces, so the concern was not fabricated. The ritual, however, became absurdly athletic. Guests crossed 10 inches of table carrying baked dishes as if guiding radioactive material to containment. 63. A friend in Tucson banned all discussions of diets, sleep scores, step counts, and supplements under her roof because she said wellness talk was just fear in athleisure. For once, the rule was broadly admirable, right up until she replaced it with mandatory discussion prompts about personal purpose. People can survive a banned topic. They suffer when neutral banter gets replaced by curated intimacy on command. 64. In suburban Cleveland, the host insisted guests dry the sink after every use because she believed standing droplets made the kitchen look recently panicked. Some people clean to restore calm. Others clean to erase evidence that life occurred there at all. By the third hand wash, adults were polishing stainless steel around a cheese tray while pretending this counted as a normal level of domestic participation. 65. At a loft in Denver, visitors were asked not to say sorry too often because the host was detoxing the home from apology culture. This is how therapy vocabulary becomes municipal law. Guests began editing ordinary politeness into strange phrasing like my fault in a non-shrinking way. By midnight, the room sounded less healed than linguistically injured, full of people stepping around each other with damaged sentence structure. 66. In suburban Sacramento, guests were required to remove delivery stickers from any bottle or container before placing it on the table because the host hated retail residue. Packaging does shape how food reads visually, but the rule turned soda into contraband, requiring relabeling. Soon, people were peeling adhesive from sparkling water like counterfeiters cleaning bills. Dinner looked elegant. The recycling bin looked like a molting snake. 67. At a family reunion in Oklahoma, no one was allowed to sit in Grandpa's recliner, though Grandpa had been dead for 6 years and had reportedly hated guests in the chair anyway. Some house rules are grief-wearing upholstery. Everyone understood the feeling and still found the empty seat impossible not to notice. The recliner sat there all afternoon like a throne, preserving resentment beyond the grave. 68. A woman in Pasadena made guests sign in on a clipboard at large gatherings just in case of parking issues, allergies, or broken glass. The stated reasons were broad enough to hide the real pleasure, which was record-keeping. Some people do not host events. They run small census operations with hummus. Nothing sharpens your awareness of your own fragility like printing your name for a bowl of pretzels. 69. In Tampa, the host had a no water on the hardwood rule, which meant guests coming back from the pool had to stop at a drying station in the laundry room before entering the main house. That part made sense. The absurdity came from the laminated arrows and timer. Once towels require process signage, the home has stopped trusting the people inside it and started trusting procedure instead. 70. At a condo in Chicago, guests could not bring surprise plus ones including babies. The host explained this while staring directly at a cousin who had arrived with an infant car seat in the face of a woman already regretting everything. Boundary setting matters. So, does proportional response. A sleeping baby is not a biker gang. Yet the room absorbed the announcement like fresh legal precedent. 71. In a house outside Richmond, no one could compliment the host's cooking until after she sat down, because she did not want praise while still operating machinery. This was less strange than weirdly specific, which is how many rules survive. They sound rational if you do not inspect them too closely. Guests chewed in silence, holding admiration in escrow until the correct administrative window opened. 72. A host in suburban Phoenix had a strict no standing in the kitchen rule for guests because she hated ambient hovering. Fair enough, except the kitchen was open plan and every path to the patio crossed it. Architectural design promised flow. House policy replaced it with airspace regulation. People kept stopping at invisible borders mid-conversation as though the island countertop had quietly become sovereign territory. 73. In a condo near Boston, guests had to place used lemon wedges in a separate small bowl. Not on plates, because the host said the oils spread bitterness visually. This is how aesthetics metastasize. The lemon already got squeezed. The fish already got eaten. But the rind still had to be quarantined for visual morale. A bowl of exhausted citrus became the evening's smallest administrative triumph. 74. A man in suburban Dallas asked guests not to say "we should do this again" unless they genuinely intended to schedule something. On paper, this was refreshingly honest. In practice, it stripped a social softener out of the exit ramp and left everyone exposed. People put on coats in an atmosphere of terrifying sincerity, trying to find a goodbye line that did not require calendar follow-through. 75. At a winter party in Vermont, the host banned boots near the fireplace because melted salt left rings on the slate and tracked winter into the room. The line sounded almost poetic, which is how controlling rules get mistaken for wisdom. Guests balanced on one foot in the foyer, removing frozen footwear while steam rose off socks. The storm stayed outside. Its paperwork came in anyway. The file keeps getting clearer. These are not just odd preferences. They are rehearsals for a deeper fantasy. A home so controlled that no guest can accidentally remind the host that other people exist. 76. In suburban Orlando, guests were told not to ask for the Wi-Fi password unless they had a strong reason. Internet access had been recategorized from utility to privilege. Some people now treat connectivity the way older generations treated liquor cabinets. One teenager asked to submit homework and was granted access like a visiting scholar. Everyone else sat nearby, visibly downgraded to less trusted mammals. 77. A host in Portland asked guests not to open windows because she had already curated the indoor temperature story. This is what happens when design language gets hold of oxygen. Ventilation is no longer airflow. It is narrative sabotage. Someone near the stove simply grew warmer in silence. The room smelled faintly of garlic and candle wax and obedience, which apparently was the intended climate. 78. At a dinner in Long Island, nobody could start eating until the host photographed every plate. Then one overhead of the table. Then a natural laugh shot that never once looked natural. Phones are often blamed for ruining gathering presents. More often, presence gets ruined by one person turning dinner into content logistics. The food cooled. The smiles tightened. Hospitality paused for image capture and plating evidence. 79. In a townhouse near Denver, guests could use the downstairs bathroom only if they had not recently eaten blueberries, turmeric, or beets because the host worried about unexpected sink color events. Minerals stain. Produce pigments linger. Still building a food-based bathroom policy is how fear becomes architecture. Guests suddenly felt their own lunch histories mattered far too much to a person they barely knew. 80. A woman in Miami instructed overnight guests not to shower after 10 because wet hair on pillowcases made the guest room smell like unfinished decisions by morning. This is not chemistry. It is metaphor weaponized into policy. Some hosts do not manage homes. They manage symbolism. One guest ended up blow-drying hair in the driveway through an extension cord so as not to offend the interpretive bedding standard. 81. At a barbecue outside Omaha, the host banned everyone from bringing folding chairs because mismatched seating made the event look financially uncommitted. Social media has trained people to fear evidence of improvisation. It is better, apparently. to make relatives stand with paper plates, then to let a practical chair tell the truth about how gatherings actually work. The lawn looked polished. The knees did not. 82. In suburban San Diego, a host required people to announce when they were leaving a room with a lit candle, even if others remained, because she believed accountability reduced open flame drift. Fire safety concerns are legitimate. Turning them into spoken room exit protocol gives cheesecake night the texture of a submarine drill. Guests kept saying things like, "I am stepping away from the Jasmine vessel now." 83. A family in Connecticut had a no negative comments about traffic rule at Sunday dinner because the host said she refused to let highways eat the opening course. This sounds silly until you realize many homes now curate emotional weather as carefully as table settings. Remove traffic complaints and people simply reroute annoyance elsewhere. The roast still arrived. So did irritation, now wearing different shoes and talking about parking apps. 84. In a house near Fresno, guests had to use outdoor voices only outdoors and indoor voices only indoors. Which sounds obvious until one child laughed too loudly at the threshold and got corrected mid-doorway like a bilingual speaker who had picked the wrong language. Rules become absurd when they overfit reality. Soon, everyone crossing the patio spoke in volume gradients, fading themselves in and out like radio signals. 85. A host in Philadelphia banned all talk of true crime because she did not want murder energy in the house after dark. Sensory superstition survives because it borrows the posture of wellness. People accepted the ban, then spent an hour discussing suspicious neighbors, porch cameras, and one cousin's locksmith story. The topic had been exiled in name only. It just came back wearing a cardigan and softer wording. 86. At a dinner in suburban Dallas, guests were told to place forks tines down on finished plates because tines up looked aggressive in photographs. That is the sort of phrase people say now without hearing themselves. Image logic has colonized the final 5 seconds of dinner. The meal was over. Nobody was still documenting it. Yet silverware posture still had to protect the household from hypothetical visual criticism. 87. In a gated community outside Phoenix, a host required guests to park nose out for clean departure flow. Then later lectured one family for leaving too quickly because it made the night feel transactional. This is the purest form of the rule spiral. The same system demands efficiency and resents its consequences. Guests were expected to exit gracefully, but also emotionally slowly and with visible appreciation. 88. A smart home owner in Austin asked visitors not to mention the devices by name because the speakers wake up to conflict. Technology is now so embedded that some households speak around it like a difficult relative. People began referring to lamps music in thermostats in evasive phrases, as though the walls had ears and a mild need for reassurance. The future arrived and immediately demanded delicate phrasing. 89. In suburban New Jersey, the host banned children from running through the sprinkler before entering the house. Not because of water, but because wet joy raises the decibel baseline indoors. There it was again. Not mess, not damage, but atmosphere management. The house was less concerned with what happened than with what feeling might follow it through the door. Childhood now required acoustic and emotional preclearance. 90. At one engagement party in Los Angeles, guests were told not to post any photos until the host did because narrative timing matters. Social media has taught people to experience events twice, once live, once in public sequence. That second layer increasingly governs the first. Guests smiled, toasted, hugged, and then sat on evidence. A celebration had occurred, but the official version had not yet been released. By now, the pattern is wearing no disguise at all. The weirdness is not in the towel, the slipper, or the lemon wedge. It is in the fear that without total management, ordinary human presence will leave a mark. 91. In suburban Tampa, guests were asked to compliment the home only in specific categories: lighting, layout, or sense of calm. The host said broad praise felt fake while wrong praise felt uninformed. Once appreciation needs menu options, you are no longer reacting naturally. You are filling out a satisfaction survey in person, under eye contact with nowhere to place your hands. 92. A host in Chicago prohibited anyone from putting coats on a bed because the bed was where the house resets overnight. Beds now carry symbolic loads far beyond sleep. They are purity screens, emotional recharge pads, anti-public membranes. Guests piled winter coats on one dining chair until it leaned like a failing tower. The house remained spiritually reset. The chair entered a dangerous level of civic burden. 93. At a holiday gathering in Atlanta, every guest had to use the same door for arrival and departure so the host could contain the traffic memory. That phrase should never exist. Yet there, it was calmly explaining why adults were being funneled through the mudroom. Some people want gatherings. Others want traceable movement patterns. The party continued. The exits had become part of the evidence chain. 94. In a condo near Seattle, visitors were told not to lean on counters while talking because the host disliked the impression of lingering ownership. Notice how often these rules circle the same anxiety. Not damage, not danger, not cost, presence. Too much of it too casually expressed. Guests stood upright through long conversations, bodies subtly denying themselves the easy gravity that makes a place feel shared. 95. A man in Nashville banned the phrase, "Where should I put this?" because he found it mentally exhausting to answer all night. Instead, guests were expected to intuit storage zones from the logic of the room. Homes that demand mind reading always blame the reader for failing the text. Soon, people wandered with casserole lids and wrapping paper, decoding an unseen grammar of bowls. Bins and host resentment. 96. At a newly renovated house outside Boston, guests had to remove lipstick before using stemware because the owner hated seeing marks on glass in photos after the fact. Stain fear, image fear, trace fear. By this point, the pattern barely bothers hiding. People sipped wine carefully, awkwardly, almost apologetically. The glasses stayed clear. So did the larger message. Leave no visible proof that a human mouth was ever here. 97. In suburban Raleigh, a host prohibited spontaneous kitchen cleanup because she wanted dishes left in place until she could assess the full event load. This transformed generosity into interference. Guests who cleared plates were quietly rerouted as if touching a bowl threatened the integrity of the dataset. Hospitality had become a post-game analytics exercise. Even leftover dip now awaited formal review before moving to the sink. 98. At a dinner in Santa Monica, everyone had to use the bathroom fan, the hand towel, and the trash can in that order because the host believed the sequence kept the guest bath from looking emotionally interrupted. There is no object in America safe from being drafted into vibe maintenance. By the end of the night, people were not using the restroom. They were executing a 3-step reputation protocol. 99. A host in suburban Denver requested that overnight guests make the bed immediately after waking, not for neatness, but because an unmade room spreads uncertainty. This is how ordinary tidiness gets upgraded into domestic weather control. The sheets had barely cooled. Coffee had not yet happened. Still, blankets were snapped into place before consciousness fully arrived, as though rumpled cotton might destabilize the county. 100. At a party outside Houston, guests were warned not to say, "This feels fancy," because the host heard it as code for, "You are trying too hard." The modern house rule increasingly guards not the object, but the interpretation of the object. Even compliments now require calibration against hidden insecurities. People praised candle placement cabinetry and roast chicken with the strained precision of diplomats avoiding tariff language. 101. In a smart townhouse in Washington, D.C., guests were asked not to touch anything that appears self-explanatory, because the host said self-explanatory things were exactly what got misunderstood. That sentence closes the entire file by itself. The rule was no longer about furniture germs, scent, or noise. It was about preemptive mistrust. The home looked immaculate. The welcome had been replaced by a user agreement. A stack of folded guest towels sits untouched beside a sink nobody wants to offend, while a front door camera quietly records the next person reading instructions on a porch. That image explains more than any lifestyle article ever will. These rules survive because homes now carry too many jobs at once. Shelter brand therapy set proof of taste, proof of control. So tell me this, what is the weirdest house rule you have ever had to follow? And did you obey it or start planning your escape subscribe if you want the next case file?